Recruiting is, of course, the lifeblood of all college football programs, and Oklahoma has near mastered that component of the program process under Lincoln Riley after, of course, Bob Stoops set his groundwork for many, many years in Norman. We got Jason Ray on the line, as always, from Last Word on College Football. This is your weekly Oklahoma fix here on the Voice of College Football, Sooners. This is our live show that we bring you each and every Friday. The schedules sometimes have to change, so please hit that bell for the notifications so you know when we're going live. But recruiting is huge here in June. We've discussed it for many weeks, and we will dive deep into it for the next hour or so. Jason, how's it going today?
Doing good, Mark. It's scorching, so it's in the middle of the summer here. I mean, obviously everywhere, but it's really, really hot around here. So I think it's certainly a segue to the big, huge recruiting weekend for Oklahoma right now.
Yeah, it's summer everywhere, but I have heard about the triple-digit temperatures your way. What are we talking about down there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's actually hit 100 just yet. I mean, maybe from a heat index perspective, but it's been upper 90s, 95 plus over the last probably week and a half. So it kind of went from spring to deep summer, kind of overnight. But it's good. It's what we're used to around here.
Yeah, that is a bit much. All right, let's look at Oklahoma's recruiting efforts. Barbecue weekend. So this is typically the biggest weekend. You let me know, and your takes on what's forthcoming here, starting tonight.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Some of the kids have already started trickling in this morning, and I think there's been a few last night as well. So it's kind of an ongoing. I think they expect all the kids to be here this evening, and so just kind of overall looking at the barbecue weekend itself, it's something that Lincoln Riley kind of kickstarted when he started as the head coach at Oklahoma, and it's really just kind of taken off. Really, obviously weren't able to have it last year because of COVID, and then this year it's honestly, I think it's the biggest recruiting weekend that they've ever had at the history of the program. So there's 40 plus kids. I've heard anywhere from about 42 to 44 that are going to be on campus this weekend. Some are taking this as their official visit, some an unofficial. So you do have some kids that are using their own dime to come here for this weekend. So it's a full weekend. Really, the kids get an opportunity to not only mingle with each other, talk to the coaches, something that's really been missing over the last year. So for Oklahoma to be in a position to host this many kids over a weekend period is, I think, really exciting for the program and exciting for football just in general, being back and having these recruiting things going on right now. So there's a lot of kids from both the 2022 class and 2023 class that are going to be on campus this weekend.
In talking to some other writers for other programs, I'm beginning to come to the realization that while this is huge for 2022, from the standpoint of evaluation, so from the 22 class standpoint, it's more about continuing to build those relationships, trying to close the deal, and say, it's that last look at Oklahoma versus 2, 3, 4 other schools, and trying to put the best foot forward, close the deal, and really find out what do we need to do to make sure that this player's on our side and committing to us. The 23 situation seems to be, and again, each program approaches it similarly, but of course there are differences, is that with the 23 athletes, that they're really, unless the athletes just so outstanding that everybody in the country wants them, that there's a lot of evaluation because there are camps. They're going through drills. They're going through one-on-one coaching, group coaching. They're competing against each other to a certain extent. Of course, it's non-contact, but it's more about the evaluation of the 23 kids, and the 22 class. It's more about, okay, we know who we want. Let's bring them in.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the things that's interesting that Lincoln Riley even talked about this past year in the 2021 season was in 2020 into the 2021 season was there was a lot of kids that he personally never got the opportunity to meet. the first time that they came on campus in the summer in 2020 was the first time that he actually met them face to face. So, I mean, I think it's kind of a very interesting time when you think about the leap of faith that some of these kids have, with understanding that, hey, I've never met the man that I'm going to go play for the next, 3 or 4 years, even 5 years of my life. So I think that point is well taken, Mark, that now some of these, the evaluation has, is obviously complete for the most part for these 2022 kids. It's just a matter of being in a position to obviously get them on campus and, kind of decide who they want to play for. Obviously, they got a little bit into the season to certainly make that determination. Some kids will commit early. Some kids will wait until the later period to commit. But yeah, I mean, I think on 2023, you're absolutely right as well. There's a lot of kids that Oklahoma has an opportunity to evaluate not only over the year this year, but the first part of next year as well to look and see exactly who they want. But Oklahoma has some, thinking of 2023, they've got some huge targets that are here this weekend. Not necessarily just on Oklahoma's radar that are very heavily, kind of pro Oklahoma right now, but some really really big kids nationally from an overall ranking perspective.
If you love the Sooners, please dive into the content. You can see that we post content just about every day here on our Oklahoma channel. We are just about a month away from Big 12 Media Days. And then right from Media Days, you pretty much step onto the field for August camp. And then we are full throttle into the 2021 season. During the spring sessions, Jason and I reviewed all the positions on the team, offense and defense, special teams. We will do the same as we get close to August camp. So we'll set you up for all the position battles and the outlook at each position, and probably dive into some opponents as well and preview them as well, and answer all your questions about August camp and the football team in 21. So leave your comments, your questions, your debate topics there in the live chat. Good to see the two Patricks here, both Smith and Lane, and also 904 Hurricane. Obvious Miami fan, but we appreciate you being here for all these live streams all over the place. 904 Hurricane is always here to support and let everybody know to please hit the like button. So this is how you can help us build this specific channel, is hit the like button. For whatever reason, I can't explain it. YouTube has built a system in which the algorithms say they want people to engage with the product. So if you hit the like button, it means a lot. Also, share the videos out on social media. So just grab the link, share the videos out on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, or just by word of mouth and on social media, just let people know, hey, we talk Oklahoma football every Friday. Jump on in with us. So we hope that you will do all of that. Jason, do you get a feel that there are particular players that, in addition to the obvious star ranking, once you see that a player is a top 10 at their position, they're obviously a huge concern and a huge desire for the football program versus maybe some moderately, I'll say moderately ranked players, but more so taking it a little bit deeper and comparing what's on the roster currently, and also what other players are being recruited at that position by Oklahoma. Who would be more of the must-gets? Because if they have to default Lincoln Riley and his staff to the second guy or the third choice at that position, there's a significant drop-off, as opposed to maybe some other positions where they're looking at four guys and they're all about the same category and they've got them rated just about the same. So if they miss on number one or number two, they're still in good shape. Where who do you think would be the must-haves in this class?
So I think interesting that you bring this up, Mark. So Oklahoma recently had a decommitment of the 2022 class. Wide receiver Jordan Hudson has decommitted from Oklahoma, and he's looking elsewhere at this point. So that's a kid where Oklahoma has traditionally under Riley been very good at the wide receiver position. So I think he's a kid that, he's from the Dallas area, so a big recruiting area for Oklahoma traditionally over years and years and years. But I think Oklahoma has been so strong at the wide receiver position. From a recruiting perspective, the fact that they also have 2 top 10 wide receivers committed in the 2022 class, with Luther Burden, the number 1 wide receiver in the country in the 2022 class, and Talon Shetron, a local product, another 4-star, number 7 ranked wide receiver overall in the country. So I think that's a position to exactly to your point that, yes, I know that there's a little bit of concern anytime someone decommits, but that's a position where I think Oklahoma is pretty strong. And I know they're looking for another guy to bring in. I think they want to bring in 3 wide receivers in this class. So he's a guy that I think Oklahoma, a position, and another area where Oklahoma will probably add another spot. And I think looking on the team, just in terms of a lot of the 2022 commits, the people that they got, it's heavy offensive line, heavy defensive line. So I think from an offensive line perspective, they're always looking to obviously to create more talent within the team. So there's a lot of offensive linemen for Oklahoma that are here. Jake Taylor is a guy who's the 29th ranked offensive tackle in the country, who's been sort of a pretty heavy lean for Oklahoma. He's a guy that Oklahoma is looking at that could be on commitment watch this weekend. Let's see, another guy that already has committed to Oklahoma is Demetrius Hunter, number 1 center in the country, a top 20 inside offensive lineman recruit in the country. He's like I said, he's already a verbal commit to Oklahoma. And then when you look at the defensive line, I think the defensive line is really a position of must for the Sooners, given the fact that we understand that there's so many people that are going to be gone off of this team probably coming into next year. Perion Winfrey is certainly going to be gone. You would think Nick Benito is a guy that could be gone. Isaiah Thomas is a guy that could be gone after this year. So they've got a lot of retooling to do on the defensive line. So I think Gabe Dindy is a really big guy. He's not here this weekend, but he's a guy that's really going to be big for Oklahoma out of Florida. In a battle with Texas A&M, it's kind of funny. Texas A&M has done a really good job from a recruiting perspective with Jimbo Fisher coming in. So it's kind of funny. There was some interesting conversation. I guess Dindy's father is a pastor, and he accepted the pastoral position at College Station at some point. So Dindy has been a pretty heavy Oklahoma lean over the last probably 5-6 months. But I think that people kind of looking into that doesn't certainly look good for Oklahoma if that's the case. And so he's a guy that Oklahoma is looking at. Another guy from a defensive line perspective, Derek Moore, 4-star kid. He's the 12th rated defensive lineman in the country out of Baltimore, Maryland. He's been a heavy OU lean over the last couple of months. He's got about 6 or 7 crystal balls at point with a pretty high confidence rate. He's a guy that I think Oklahoma feels pretty good about, maybe even feels good about maybe securing a commitment this weekend. Let's see, just kind of going through the list, kind of thinking about the defensive line area. Omario Bohr is another guy, one of the best defensive linemen in the country. Again, he's probably more of a slight OU lean. He's here this weekend. And I think that's an opportunity for him as well, for Oklahoma, looking at that. And I guess the only other area that I would mention that Oklahoma's done a good job at the skill positions on offense, really with the exception of running back. We've talked about this a couple of times, that Oklahoma's missed out on some big time running back, and they've been running back targets that have been commits to Oklahoma for a while and then kind of flipped late. Jason McClellan a couple of years ago was someone that comes to mind last year. Kamar Wheaton is a guy that wasn't really committed, but most thought that he was kind of a lean to Oklahoma. So there's a couple of guys. I think the biggest guy that they're looking at is Gavin Sawchuk. He's a Texas kid. He's the number 2 ranked running back in the country. Interesting. He's still just a 4-star, but number 2 overall. I'm sorry, he's not a Texas kid. He's from Littleton, Colorado. I got the two mixed up. But He's another guy who's pretty heavily OU at this point. He's been through some visits to, I believe, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson as a recent. So I think the thing that's different, I think, now that you're seeing over the last couple of years, Mark, Oklahoma's battling Alabama, they're battling Clemson, they're battling Ohio State, they're battling Georgia, they're battling these teams that are perennial blue bloods, as opposed to a few years ago when you looked at Oklahoma was not in those battles, was not in those conversations, specifically at the kind of the defensive line position, which is a big area that I think Oklahoma has struggled a bit in the past. So being in that conversation and having kids like the number one overall recruit in the 2023 class who is a defensive lineman, having him here on campus just shows that Oklahoma's getting that foot in the door a little bit more with the talent that they have already on campus at the defensive line position.
Jason Ray, last word on college football. So I encourage everybody that's watching, which is about 40 plus right now, check out Jason's work on Last Word on College Football. He and Tony Siracusa, Kevin McGuffey are friends of mine that have been joining us here at the Voice of College Football for quite a long time and do an exceptional job of covering the game that we all love. So regardless of your team, they've got it covered over there on Last Word on College Football. But Oklahoma fans right here, check out Jason's work on Last Word on College Football. And again, the content that we provide here each and every day, much of it has to do with and is only possible because of Jason. So we appreciate Jason being here every Friday. And I certainly post videos like, for example, there was a offensive lineman who hit the transfer portal this week. So I always jump on there and give my evaluation and the rundown of where that stands and how that hurts a positional unit. And so check out those videos that we provide on a daily basis. Jason, you mentioned getting a commit again from the number one wide receiver in the country, and it just seems to be a perfect match in regards to, because of the offense that Lincoln Riley runs, because of the emphasis on the passing game. Not that I think at this point Oklahoma is passing the ball any more than anybody else, but of course, because of the status of the program and how good they are throwing the football, with Lincoln Riley being a mastermind on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, from the recruit standpoint, it's an attractive place to go for a wide receiver. We've seen capable wide receivers and really good wide receivers through Oklahoma during the Bob Stoops years. But to your point that you made just a couple minutes ago, it's really taken off in terms of gaining some of those elite guys at wide receiver just here in the last few years. So it's attractive from the recruiting standpoint, from the recruits standpoint, but it's also, I'm sure, from Lincoln Riley and his staff's perspective that, we're going to push hard. Not that we're going to prioritize any particular position over other positions, but this is a position we need depth to make sure if some of these guys become busts, that we're going to have multiple layers of really quality guys, plus those high-end guys we really need. So it's kind of a marriage of both desires on both parties' side that is resulting in all these elite wide receivers coming home.
No, you're absolutely right. It's probably the best position that Oklahoma's been able to recruit under Riley. And to your point, Mark, it's exactly because of the offense he runs, the success that Oklahoma has had. And, obviously it starts with Riley, but then, when you look at the quarterbacks, they've been able to get in on campus. When you talk about Spencer Rattler, who was a top, he was a 5-star, one of the top quarterbacks in the country. You talk about Caleb Williams last year, one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Oklahoma's not really recruiting a quarterback here in the 2022 class, but then when you're looking at 2023, Malachi Nelson, who's the number 2 quarterback in the country. So I think, the opportunity for some of these kids to come in and not only play for a guy like Riley, but come to a place that has really good I mean, great quarterback play over the last few years since Riley has been here is, I think, another factor that kind of goes into it. When you think of Oklahoma hasn't had a ton of, when you look at great wide receivers make it to the NFL, but CeeDee Lamb is a guy recently who's a guy that's made it. Hollywood Brown is a guy with Baltimore who's playing really well. Mark Andrews, just from a tight end perspective, just kind of looking in that same mold. So yeah, I think that's a good. When you look at that, and when you look at the ability for Oklahoma to put players into the NFL, and they're playing at the at the highest level. When you think about, they've obviously not won playoff games, but they're making it to the playoffs almost every year. Obviously last year they didn't make it, but the 3 years before that certainly they were in the playoffs. So I think that that makes it kind of advantageous for you to get some of the top wide receivers in the country, knowing exactly how good the offense has been year in and year out at Oklahoma under Riley.
You also, Jason, addressed the defensive line and the upgrade there. I got to say that in doing a number of breakdowns of recruiting involving SEC teams, the thing that I noticed was exactly what you stated. Running down recruiting battles involving SEC teams, and then seeing, okay, that collection of powers in the South going after those particular players, and then Ohio State jumps in almost always, and Clemson. Seeing Oklahoma for the first time that I can remember, not just one guy, but in looking at the top 10 to 20 players recruited by SEC schools, seeing Oklahoma in there multiple times on the short list under consideration. So for them to dive into Georgia and Florida and be on the short list is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and I think it was a little bit of a change. I know there was a few years ago that I think there was a general thought that you can't win a national championship in the Big 12 based on the type of offenses that are being played, and maybe the lack of defense that's played within the Big 12. But I think where Oklahoma, specifically over the years where they've lost those playoff games, I think they understood and able to be in a position to compete with some of those teams at a national level, at a playoff level, at a national championship game level. They understand that they have to be better on the interior defensive line, and even at the linebacker position, where they've struggled in the past to even get their foot in the door. And not even talk about actually getting some of those kids. So the fact that when you look at all of these 40-some players, that many of them are 4- and 5-star kids, and even some of the 3-star kids that you look at, when you look at the offer list, it's very consistent. To your point, you have Alabama, you have Georgia, you have LSU, you have Clemson, you have Ohio State, you have all of the guys that are in there, and Oklahoma is still high on the list of a lot of those kids. So credit to Riley, credit to some of the guys that he's brought in that have been an infusion of youth, I think, within the team. Brian Odom has proved to be a great recruiter on the linebacker side. Roy Manning, who came with Alex Grinch, who's really a dynamic recruiter, was at UCLA before, and certainly was at Washington State with Grinch before that. And then I think one of the knocks on Grinch was coming in. He wasn't a great recruiter, but he's done really a phenomenal job since he's been here at getting some of those kids. So I think the youth that they have at the coaching position has been helpful, and the excitement that they've been able to bring to the program on the defensive side. And I think some of those kids, you see success, and Oklahoma, but okay, yeah, they're great offensively, but what did they do on the field against Alabama defensively? What did they do against LSU? But I think you're seeing this nationally. The thing that's changed, the discussion is changing about Oklahoma's defense, where it's like, no, the Oklahoma's defense is not going to be able to be in a position to allow them to win the championship, to now saying they might be good enough to. They're not going to carry Oklahoma to a win, certainly, but they're good enough to win a championship. I think at this point, when you look at the way they finished last year, particularly the way they finished against Florida, and some of those games, you look at it, and Oklahoma, had the defensive talent and production on the field to put themselves in a position to possibly, play for a national championship, and with who they've brought in recruiting with a transfer portal as well. I think Oklahoma has put themselves in a position, talent-wise, to be better on the field, but not only that, but attract some of those recruits that want to go play for a guy like Grinch, want to go play for a team like Oklahoma that is getting better and improving and has the talent on defense.
We've got 52 on the line. We're about a half hour deep into our Oklahoma live show. So keep in mind that if you're joining us late, that once the video posts, you can catch up with everything that you missed. As Jason outlined, the big recruiting weekend coming up this weekend, actually starting pretty much as we speak there in Norman. And Jason, I'll say this, though, that there seems to be a window of opportunity here for Oklahoma. So they better not miss it, or they may kind of level off to be what they've been, which is, there's nothing wrong with that for sure. They're dominating the conference. But if you follow me on this, they have failed in the college football playoff. They played one really competitive game. Then the other two, they were outmatched to a certain extent, certainly against LSU. Alabama, we could argue all day. Pro-Oklahoma people would say they made a great comeback and it was a competitive game and they gave Alabama a scare. Other people would say Alabama took their foot off the pedal and they had the game in hand. I think there's some truth somewhere in between. But basically, the bottom line is that they've got 4 college football playoff appearances and they're 0 for 4. But because of the evaluation of this particular team in 2021, and that it's going to be Oklahoma good in all the places that it's been good in the past. And I mean elite good, quarterback, wide receiver, all those places. Plus, they've got this defense that showed us a lot more last year, and they're getting better. And that this is a legitimate national championship caliber team, that if they don't take advantage of that kind of thought that's being pervaded within the college football circles and college football nation, like if they go out and they lose by 3 touchdowns in a college football playoff game this year, and then next year they go out and lose by a couple touchdowns in a college football playoff, then that excitement that, okay, Oklahoma can win those kind of games, I would think would recede, and everybody would say, okay, well, it's Oklahoma. They're still really good. It's not like they're going to run off the rails and not be able to get top level recruits, but that very, very high end recruit may not consistently acknowledge them and consider them if they're not able to take advantage of this window of time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Mark, that you bring that up, and I think it's more just some of the people that I talk to and just kind of understanding. It's almost a if not now when scenario for this Oklahoma team this year. Some of the things that we're hearing, specifically when you think about the summer. I know Bruce Feldman had a piece on this, and just talking within the program, that a lot of people inside the program are just ecstatic about the maturation of Spencer Rattler that he's made over the spring and over the summer. That a lot of the things are clicking. He wasn't super comfortable with the offense, and you can understand that, right? Him just coming in the summer in a COVID year, not really having the spring, having to learn everything within a couple of months. And then so I think inside the program they're really happy at his ability to have a tighter grasp on the offense, have a tighter grasp on making those quick decisions, moving around in the pocket, typical things that you would see from a second year quarterback in a big program like this. So I think Oklahoma's certainly excited about that. I think when you think about some of the transfers that Oklahoma has brought in, when you bring in a lot of grad transfers, I think that kind of signals that you want to be in a position where you've missed on a lot of key recruiting areas, or you're in a position where you feel like this is the year you want to win now. So they've got 5 or 6 very key transfers that are going to help them in areas of where they might have had some gaps, Wanye Morris from a tackle perspective is a good one. When you talk about Eric Gray from a running back perspective, even Kevontre Bradford from LSU as a recent, when you look at Eric Gray, Kennedy Brooks, Kevontre Bradford, and then you look at Marcus Major, Oklahoma has, three of probably, as good as 3 or 4 backs as you would expect any team to have in the country. And then when you go to the defensive line, as we've talked about, you have a guy named Perion Winfrey who is, by all accounts has gotten so much better at this point right now than he was last year. He's making the changes that he needs to make to finish, and I think that was some of the problem with him last year. And you got talent all across that defensive line: Isaiah Thomas, Nick Benito. You got you bringing back some kids that that were out from a COVID set out perspective last year, opt out. Oklahoma has the most depth that they've had at every single position on the defensive side of the ball than they've ever had. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think if you go through, thinking of things, if you don't have, a catastrophic injury or, a large amount of kids being out at a certain position or something like that, if Oklahoma at the very least does not win a playoff game, it's probably about as close to national championship or bust as you can kind of think about. And I think that's no different than Ohio State or no different than Clemson or Alabama. If they don't win a national championship, it's kind of considered a little bit of a disappointing season. But in the same token, with the lack of success that Oklahoma has had in the postseason, I think it's critical for everything that we're talking about, for the momentum of the program, for the recruiting, to get over the hump and win that playoff game. Because exactly to your point, I don't know if I would say that the window is closing, but it might be down a little bit. The window might be coming down a little bit, just in terms of the experience that they have at the right positions this year for the Sooners.
Maybe I'm a little forgiving in this way. I tend to evaluate the play on the field more so than just, okay, they lost, move on. They're not good enough. Like after the Rose Bowl game against Georgia, that game could have been won by either team.
Right.
Georgia won the game. Credit them with the win. That's all that matters in terms of advancing. Whether you win 52-0 or 52-48 is winning the game to get to the championship game. But we're here to evaluate the play on the field and where the program stands based on the evaluation of the play on the field. Yeah. And I came away from that game thinking, okay, well, that game was a toss-up. I don't even know who's better. I think Georgia's still better, just based on recruiting talent and so forth and so on. But basically, just watching the game, if you took the names and the colors off the jerseys and they just played a football game, I'd be like, okay, those two teams could play 100 times and it could be 50-50.
Yeah.
So that's one evaluation. Then the evaluation versus Alabama and LSU were different. So that leads me to, for me personally, and I know I'm an outlier most of the time, is that if Oklahoma makes the playoff this year and they run up against, of course, one of the top 3 teams in the country, and it's 45-42, pick the score. It's a great game. Then I'm going to come away, even if Oklahoma loses, and say they're one of the best teams in the country. But I know because of this build up toward 21 for them, and because of the 4 disappointments in the playoff, that a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, it was a great game, but they didn't get it done. Same old Oklahoma. They're not ready for this. So if they could win a playoff game, Jason, and then even if I know it's national championship or bust to a certain extent, and I agree with you that they're in that category of that small collection of teams that it's kind of like, well, this is the reason we're playing, is to win the national championship. But if they get to the national championship, they will have knocked off one of those big boys, most likely.
Yeah.
And they play a competitive national championship game and lose by a touchdown, lose by 10. I think that would be a significant step.
I completely agree with you, Mark. And I think to your point, to a certain extent, the playoff game doesn't matter the score as long as Oklahoma is able to win that game. Now, if they're not able to win that game, if it's 45-42 or if it's 17-14, whatever the score is, I think it brings up a lot of questions probably within the program. Not that it's, not that it's worst case scenario or anything like that, but I think, if you're Lincoln Riley, you have to wonder, can I win a championship at Oklahoma? Because he's been linked to a lot of NFL jobs, and he's said that he does have it's intriguing to him. He has said that it's intriguing, but I think there's probably one or two specific jobs that he would be potentially something that would be interesting to him. But when you think of how much infusion of talent that Oklahoma has had on this roster coming into 2021, and then you look at the coaching staff that they have on both sides of the ball. When you look at all of it put together, the schedule is a little bit lighter this year. You look at Oklahoma from a conference, and they're significantly better than everybody else. They should, obviously Iowa State's there, Texas is there, Oklahoma State's there, but they're better across the board than anyone else. And it's not, there's some, we've got into this discussion, how wide is the gap between, Oklahoma and Iowa State versus, Clemson and North Carolina, or, Ohio State and Wisconsin, just for an example. But I mean, I think it's comparable. So when you think about everything that kind of comes into play this year for Oklahoma, given the fact that, in the past, if they've had a year like this where they're anticipated to be very good and challenge for a championship, if they have a key loss at a certain area, I mean, it's damaging. I think this year, when you look at every single positional group for the Sooners, I think they could absorb a couple of losses and still be okay, and still be pretty close to the same level that they have been previously. I think the one exception could be the offensive line, and the Stacey Wilkins transfer portal announcement is. I mean, he wasn't going to be a starter, but he probably would be a guy that might have provided some depth. But it could be one of those things through the summer. He was told that he's not going to get a lot of playing time, even in a backup role. So that's why he is moving on. But if Oklahoma has some attrition at any position, the offensive line probably would be the area that I would be most concerned with, given the fact that they were a little bit not quite as good as you would expect last year. Still good, but not at the same level that they had been previously. So, I think you put all those things together. What kind of questions creep into your mind if you're Oklahoma, at the administration level, at the coaching level, at the player level as well, knowing that, okay, we had all of this in place and we still weren't able to win a playoff game. What does that mindset look like going into 2022? Would be something that would be interesting to think about if it did happen. But I know for Oklahoma fans and the like, they don't want to have to worry about that. They want to. I think if you win a playoff game, obviously the national championship is certainly the goal this year. But I think if you win the playoff game, I think that puts a lot of pressure, takes a lot of pressure off, and maybe the monkey off their back just a little bit.
I agree. And to further your point about Oklahoma's gap over the rest of the Big 12, as Iowa State in particular, Texas, Oklahoma State appear to be threats to a certain extent on a given day, but overall really aren't. We will have to have that proven otherwise on the field. That if you look at so I've got Athlon's here, their position rankings in the Big 12, Oklahoma's number 1 everywhere except defensive back number 2 and running back number 2. So, and everybody else that might be number 2 or 3 in those different rankings for each position are 7 or 8 somewhere else. So basically Oklahoma's got a clear advantage over everybody else. And I'm alarmed at Texas to a certain extent based on these Athlon unit rankings. Number 5, 3, 3, 3, 5, 6, 5. That seems pretty marginal out of them if you look at the individual units. But again, Oklahoma number 1 across the board, number 2, a couple spots at running back and defensive back. That's according to Athlon's. That's not the Bible, but it's a reliable source.
Well, and I think one thing, when you look at this 2021 season for Oklahoma, a thing that Oklahoma has struggled with over the last couple of years is kind of putting some of these inferior teams away. So I think having that killer instinct is something that Riley really has to work on. He admitted it a few times last year that, yeah, I got to do a little bit of a better job in making sure that we keep that foot on the gas. When you look at Oklahoma was up 35-14 over Kansas State last year. They lose that game. In Ames, they're up 17-6 with the ball. And granted, this is early, but they're up 17-6 with the ball, and they can separate themselves a little bit at that point. And then certainly they went through a little bit of a long stretch there. The Baylor game's another game this year that kind of, when you think about Iowa State, even in the Big 12 championship game, Oklahoma was up 14, 17 points early on in that game, and they have a tendency, whatever it is, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's a thing where, Riley is trying to pivot between coaching and calling plays with a team that has a solid defense that can help you versus calling plays against a defense that, doesn't, he doesn't have a defense that's capable of stopping, knowing that you have to push, you have to push the envelope a little bit more. But I think it's one of the things that Riley is learning, and I think that's his maturation as a number one, as a play caller, but also as a head coach and understanding, because granted, when you think about where he's been, he's never been in a position where he's had a strong defense, thinking that he came from East Carolina. East Carolina has, traditionally, I'm going to outscore you. Texas Tech, very much the same thing. So when you think about where he's at with Oklahoma, he's now in a position where he has a very strong defense. So I think he's kind of battling within and trying to understand from a play caller perspective, what do I need to do to balance pushing the gas pedal all the way down, knowing that I've got to score 40 points to win versus not hitting the brakes so quickly, so early that he lets some of these inferior teams hang around. So, and that's something that'll be, interesting this year, all the way through, especially given the fact that Oklahoma doesn't have a very tough non-conference, a team like Tulane to start off with. That's a team that Oklahoma, you would think that they would win that game by 4 touchdowns at least, but on the road early on, what does that look like? So I think we're going to learn, is that killer instinct there a little bit more so than it has been last year.
Talking Oklahoma football each and every week with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. Last Word on College Football. Head on over there, check out Jason's work and the rest of the staff. And we post content just about every day here on our Oklahoma channel. So please check out the videos that we've posted already, of course. And as we take you through the summer with Jason and others, lock in on the content. Leave your comments, your questions, your debate topics. Jason has addressed recruiting for the first 25 minutes or so, something in that range. So if you missed that, as we've got more and more people on the line, with about 70 on the line right now, then certainly wait for the video to post. Not that we're not going to talk any more recruiting, but Jason's pretty much addressed that. The big weekend starting right now as we speak in Norman, barbecue weekend there at Oklahoma. So along the lines of some of the things we talked about, I'm going to hit you up with 3 stats here. And I'm not like a huge, big advanced metrics guy, like I'm studying them, but when I run across them, I think that they're typically valid. So, for example, for those of you who are into stats, that the passer rating, for example, is a stat that's been around for decades. And is it meaningful? Yes. Has it been improved? Yes. The QBR is an improvement because it basically takes context into the statistics, and it takes game situation and scenarios into play. If you throw a completion for 2 yards on 3rd and 1, that's more successful than completing a 15-yard play on 3rd and 22. So basically, that it would be rated in such a way that if you threw a 2-yard completion, you wouldn't be given much credit for that in a passer rating, but you did what you needed to do to get the job done. So anyway, it even goes beyond that. So I'm going to start out with the one defensive stat I've got here that really speaks to what we're talking about in terms of the improvement. The improvement is unquestioned. Even when Oklahoma was dominating the Big 12 a few years ago, they were still giving up scads of points and yardage against just about everybody in the Big 12. Now they've gotten to a point where they're pretty much clamping down everybody in the Big 12. We'll see what happens on the next level with some of the national powers. But so Oklahoma last season on defense limited opponents to 30 touchdown drives and 10 field goals in 149 opponent possessions. So they had a stop rate of 73+%. It was the best in the Big 12. It was number 14 in the nation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of incredible to think about, understanding where, or certainly where Oklahoma has come from. I mean, I think where Oklahoma struggled a little bit last year defensively is really kind of giving up the big play. They gave up a lot of big plays to Kansas State, gave up quite a few big plays to Iowa State as well. It's not at all, completely surprising to see that stat. But to your point, Mark, seeing this over the last year, understanding what that improvement has looked like, and really just getting off the field is such a big component to the defense. It's been kind of a bend but don't break defense from Grinch, but they've been excellent on third down. They've been excellent on being able to get off the field. So that's a trend that you would hope that would continue and expect to continue. And interesting to know how well Oklahoma performed nationally there.
Really, if you look at these scores throughout last season in the Big 12, and I watched just about all these games. I didn't see him play Kansas. Pardon me for missing that one. But other than that, I watched, a good portion of all these games. Really, Texas was the only team that was successful offensively against them. And that was a game in which Oklahoma, by any measurement, was the better team, but made mistakes and kept Texas in the game. And it was an entertaining game. But Oklahoma was clearly the better team, but Texas had a shot, of course, of winning and went to overtime, but and put up 45 points. But other than that, TCU scored 14, Texas Tech scored 28. And when it's a 62-28 game, you can even throw out the 28 because a couple of those touchdowns were meaningless. Kansas will forget, but 9 points there. Oklahoma State, not a great offense, but a guy at quarterback that's dynamic at times, one of the best running backs in the nation, one of the best wide receivers in the nation, really good offense, not a great offense, but a really good offense that's going to score 35 points against most teams, scored 13.
Yeah.
Baylor scored 14. Iowa State only scored the 21 in the championship game.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point, Mark. Two games from my perspective where they performed, not up to I think what they would expect, from a standard perspective. The Kansas State game and the Texas game, I think, are the two games, specifically the Kansas.
Oh yeah, I missed that one. That one right out of the gate. Yeah, the first Big 12 game. Yeah.
So, and I think, not from an excuse perspective, but I think there's a lot of things that you can take away from that game. It was their first Big 12 game, the second game of the year, and such a crazy year last year where it just completely fell apart like that. Like no other game that I've seen over the last few. When you have a team down 35-14 in the late part of the third quarter, it's something that you got to win that game every single time. But, the wheels fell off defensively. They gave up a ton of big plays. And, to your point, they were really good for 3 quarters against Texas. It kind of very much the same way. It kind of fell apart a little bit towards the end, and a little bit from the Iowa State game as well. They played good enough to win, but they gave up some plays towards the end of the game. So I think where Oklahoma was able to do a little bit of a better job is to compete for 4 quarters, specifically in those games. Like they did well throughout the season, even early on, in the first 3 quarters to be, really, and sometimes even 3.5 quarters, but, they weren't in a position that they were able to finish those games. And maybe part of it was, the lack of practice, the lack of spring, some of the experience that they didn't have, coming into the season early on, and some of those kids kind of matured and really understood what it needed to be, kind of what the level of play needed to be at Oklahoma. But yeah, no, I think 2 games, and I think the challenge is for Oklahoma to be consistent through 12 games, through 13 games, through 15 games if they make it that far, is to be consistent. And if you have a bad quarter against Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, I mean, you're going to be done. So that consistency has to be there for all 4 quarters, and I think that's the maturation that hopefully you'll see out of this Oklahoma team this year.
The exciting games in college football are typically when the lesser team comes out hot and grabs the 35-14 lead. Those are the games I want to see in the fourth quarter, is when the better team is down by 21 and watching them come back, because that's usually we know they're really good and they're better, but they've had an off 3 quarters. Can they come back? When the better team's up 35-14, you just figure the game's over. Yep. So yeah, that was astonishing that Kansas State came all the way back for a second consecutive year and beat Oklahoma. Before I get to these other 2 stats, we've got Don on the line. He's got a question here about what the over-under is on commits this weekend. And before Jason addresses that, I will say my perspective on this is that all these major schools are entertaining all these athletes for the entirety of June going into July. Most of these guys, obviously, when we talk about the caliber school of a Oklahoma, these guys are then going to wherever, Texas A&M, Florida, Ohio State, wherever they're going the other 3 or 4 weekends. So they've got a lot to think about, and they've got a lot of attractive offers out there. So I would not expect too many commits. We're already practically 20 days deep into June, and I think some people out there just thought the dead period's over June 1st. People are going to start committing. Well, they've got to visit the schools. And most likely they're not going to go to their first of 4 visits and just say, hey, I'm sold. They're going to let it all sink in and give them time. So I would expect more so in the first 15 to 20 days of July that we'll start to see some commitments. But that said, Don is asking for the over-under on commitments for this weekend.
Yeah, so
who knows?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's interesting. I think when Oklahoma had the 2019 barbecue, Oklahoma had like 4, 5, 6 commitments that came out of that weekend. So I think it set the bar extremely high for the commitments. And there's a few. I think there's probably 3 or 4 that I think that's a real possibility that they might get. They might land from a commitment this weekend. So I would probably set the over/under on 2. And then, kind of go from there. If Oklahoma doesn't have any, probably it would be surprising. I would expect at least 1 or 2 that would come out of this weekend. But probably, I mean, if you're looking for a large amount of commitments, exactly to your point, there's still some waiting to be done probably for some of those kids as well. So I think Oklahoma would obviously be ecstatic if they got 5 or 6 guys that would commit out of this weekend. But I personally would probably put it at 2, look for a couple of commitments that could happen.
Now I'm going to hit you with 2 stats that will shock no one. Oklahoma gained 10 or more yards on offense 27.5% of the time. That was the best mark in the Big 12 and number 6 in the country.
Yeah, definitely not surprising. I mean, I would be interesting to see how many of those explosive plays were pass versus rush, because I think Oklahoma wasn't as dynamic on the ground, at least in the first part of the year. With Ramondre Stevenson towards the latter part of the year, they got some bigger chunks, but early on they kind of struggled there. So that would be interesting to see what the breakdown pass versus run was.
And there's another offensive stat here that I won't read the percentage because it's not going to make any sense to anyone. It certainly doesn't me, but it's more about where they rank in the Big 12 and in the country. So there's an interesting metric that measures how successful each down is. So on first down, it's 1st and 10. How many yards is successful play? Well, I don't know what their rating there. I think it's like 4.5 or whatever their yardage total is to make it seem like a successful play. If you do the math, the easy traditional math, well, if you're going to keep the ball for 4 downs, which of course you aren't at your own 20, then you only need 3 yards per play to gain a first down. Or you need about 3.3 or so to gain it if you're playing for 3 plays before you punt for the first down. But it's something different than that. It's even more complicated and more thought through what a successful play is on first down. It's 4 or 5 yards, whatever it is. And then on second down, depending on your yardage, if you get sacked and it's 2nd and 18, then there's a statistic that tells us what a successful second down play would be versus if you ran for 7 yards on first down, you got 2nd and 3, what's a successful play? Third down, it's easy. You got to gain a first down. So that's the successful play on third or fourth down is if it's 3rd and 1,000,000, you got to gain 1,000,000. If it's 3rd and 1, you got to gain 1. That's a successful play, yardage wise. But Oklahoma, again, number 1 in the Big 12. This speaks to efficiency right here, just offensive efficiency and just getting to the sticks and setting yourself up on first and second down for getting to the sticks. They're number 1 in the Big 12. They're number 4 in the country in offensive efficiency, getting the yardage on first, second, third, and fourth downs that is required.
And I think what's crazy about that is, I mean, when you think about it, Oklahoma had a relatively down year offensively. They didn't have a down year is probably a tough way to say it. They weren't quite as efficient this past year as they had been under Hurts, under Baker Mayfield, under Jalen Hurts, under Kyler Murray. So, you would, as crazy as it sounds, you would almost expect that efficiency to maybe go up a little bit this year, given the fact that they weren't as efficient last year as they've been in recent history, which is obviously a very good problem to have.
Talking Oklahoma football here each and every Friday. Jason, you let me know when you need to take off.
Okay, I got probably about 5 more minutes.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I'm in the process of looking at week 1 matchups, and if we're not talking Oklahoma here on this channel and on this particular live stream, of course, we're going to probably default to Texas would be the next one, and that game they've got against Louisiana is not going to be an easy affair. Maybe all their talent comes together, and they're certainly substantially more talented than Louisiana, and they beat them by 3 touchdowns. But most likely, that's going to be a serious challenge because Texas they have the makings. I was looking at their defensive personnel last night. They have the makings. They have the ingredients of having a really good defense. Of course, now they got Sark on offense, so if he can prep the quarterback in time, most likely Casey Thompson, Bijan Robinson's phenomenal. And they've got Xavier Worthy, who's just a big-time recruit. They just plucked away from Michigan. And, of course, Joshua Morris, one of the best wide receivers in the Big 12. So they have the ingredients to be very interesting, but they've got to put it together, of course. And, again, they don't have that cushion game or two to get ready for what was an unlikely, really difficult opponent here in week 1.
Yeah, so interesting for Texas is it's a little bit of a flip between Oklahoma and Texas in terms of what it looks like early on. That game that you'd mentioned with Louisiana, and then a couple of weeks later, or maybe it's the next week. No, I think it's 2 weeks later. Then they go to Arkansas and play the Razorbacks. So you got to look at when Oklahoma and Texas play. Texas might be a little bit more battle tested than Oklahoma is. Kind of depends on who you, the jury's still out on what Nebraska will be like early on in the year. But you got to think they'll be 3-0 coming into that game. But looking at Texas is interesting. They got a lot of talent. I would say the biggest weakness that they have on their team right now is offensive line. They've really struggled from a recruiting perspective, and they just don't have a lot of big time kids, in the program right now at the offensive line position. Like you said, that they've got Bijan Robinson is we've talked about clearly the second best running back in the Big 12, behind Breece Hall. You could make an argument that he could just from a talent perspective, could be better eventually. Maybe not necessarily this year, but and then you got a capable backup in Roshan Johnson there as well. You got a lot of talent at the wide receiver position. Casey Thompson, although he hasn't he hasn't had a lot of experience, I should say, but he got a ton of experience in the bowl game last year against Colorado, I believe it was. And so, yeah, I think they have all the ingredients to be, like I said, they were a 9-3 team a year ago, and they had a lot of close losses. In that area, the close loss by field goal to Iowa State, the loss to Oklahoma, but in overtime. So when you think of that team, I mean, I think it's, as much as Oklahoma fans hate Texas, it's better for them to be good. I mean, it's better for them to be, especially this year when you think about coming into that annual Red River rivalry against Oklahoma. You would like to see them, makes the game even that much better for them to be good. But I know just like Oklahoma State, I know that Oklahoma fans love to see Texas be unsuccessful. So it'll be interesting. They have the talent, absolutely have the talent. Just from a cultural perspective, how does Sark bring that stuff together? It will be interesting to see, and we'll find out early on. To your point,
over 80 on the line for the show. We appreciate everybody possibly listening to me in regards to my one homework assignment for everybody. Please let people know that we're here every Friday talking Oklahoma football. We would love to have this expand out and explode throughout the summer as we prepare for the 21 season with all of you. So let people know that love Oklahoma football, and of course we've got several other fan bases always represented here in the live chat. So just let college football fans know that we're here every Friday talking Oklahoma, the Big 12, and the nation with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. Jason, as always, appreciate you stopping by. Hope you have a great weekend.
No problem. You do the same, Mark.
And we will catch everyone soon. I've got a call-in show tonight at 7 o'clock on the main channel. So if you want to call me up, I'm previewing week 1 across the nation and take your calls as well. We will see you